Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay, here to talk about the life of one of the most prolific, in fact, I think the most prolific television icon in the history of the medium. Uh, Last week, we honored the life of a conservative icon in politics, and that was Henry Kissinger. Today, we honor the life and legacy of a man who's perhaps the biggest liberal icon in our culture and society, and his contributions to the world of American culture through the medium of television. And that is Norman Lear, who passed away today at 101. So he actually beat Henry Kissinger by 1 year. Anyway, let's talk about Norman Lear. Who is he? He was born in 1922 to a Russian slash Ukrainian Jewish family in New Haven, Connecticut. When he was a child, his family moved from there to Chelsea, Massachusetts, where he grew up. His family was working class, and his dad, being an immigrant, was much like the character that he would later develop on television, Archie Bunker, and his mother was much like Gene Stapleton's character of Edith Bunker. But something happened to Norman when he was 9 years old. He was tinkering around with his radio, and he happened to come across the broadcasts of Father Coughlin. Now, who was Father Coughlin? Father Coughlin was a very, at that time, prolific radio announcer and polemicist. Think of people like Tucker Carlson today, people like Ben Shapiro, people like Michael Knowles, people like Andrew Clavin, these types of right wing individuals that use the medium of radio to broadcast their right wing views. He was a Catholic priest, and he was against the war in World War II, and he was against the administration of FDR. He was against the New Deal. At first, he was for the New Deal, but at first in 1932 to get us out of the Great Depression. But after a while, he began to vociferously speak out against FDR, and he was warning the country against the infiltration of communism, the infiltration of Bolshevism, and of course the Jews. Very anti-Semitic, really anti-Semitic, not the kind of pseudo-anti-Semitism that you see from today's, uh, that you see people accusing people of in today's society. The real kind, the kind of uh, protocols of the elders of Zion type kind. Well, anyway, Norman Lear came across this, and he noticed, even though he was, of course, he's Jewish, so he was against the vitriol of Father Coughlin. He noticed that you could use the medium of communication and the medium of entertainment to change the hearts and minds of people, and basically make them more liberal. So anyway, or sway them in a certain direction in the way you want them to go. Put it that way. So he goes to the army. He serves in the Mediterranean theater in World War II. He's in the army from 1942 to 1945. Um, and once he leaves the army, he begins to work well, initially he's working in journalism because his uncle is working in journalism. But not long after that, he starts to work in Hollywood, where he works with uh, certain variety at that time in the late 40s and early 50s. What was really the rage in Hollywood was these variety shows. So he worked for a while in that, but it wasn't. He really didn't get his ball bearings for real until 1969. In the mid 1960s in England, there was a show called "Till Death Do Us Part," and it was basically about this young couple, liberal couple, left wing views, living with their father-in-law, who was a Tory, a real conservative. So Norman Lear came across this, and he had the idea to bring this show to the United States and set it right in the American living room, because at this time we're in the Vietnam War. There's the civil rights movement going on. There's the Black Power movement is is almost on the rise. Um, this is not Tennessee Ernie um, that he was working with previously. This is some serious stuff. So in 1969, CBS finally gives him the go ahead to make his American version of Till Death Do Us Part, All in the Family. And this show changes the landscape of television at this time, because no other show before this was ever addressing hot button political issues. You had Archie Bunker on there, who was a bigot, basically. He was against any and everybody, ethnic minorities, gays, uh, trans people, I mean, whatever. You know what I mean? He was, that was his thing. And then you had Meathead, who would argue on behalf of the liberal side. The first episode, they discussed the Vietnam War, which we're still in at this point in 1969. So that show revolutionizes television. Then from there, in the early 70s, a character played by B. Arthur, Maud, who is Edith's relative, um, who is Edith's who is Edith's relative, Edith Bunker's relative, uh, takes care of her when she's sick. Comes in from out of town in upstate New York, takes care of her when she's sick. And B. Arthur's character is so successful on that episode that he spins it off until her own character, Maud. And Maud is basically this feminist, because at that time in the early 70s, the feminist movement was starting up. So the idea was to have an Archie Bunker, but a reverse Archie Bunker, somebody who is so liberal that she is sometimes delusional. Hey, what's going on? Especially how she deals with her housekeeper, Florida Evans. You know what I mean? She says things that, how like well-meaning liberals sometimes say things that they think are pro African American, but they come off as being just as delusional and just as prejudicial, but in a different way than right-wing bigots, condescending, if you will. Well, Maud is similar. Then, after 1973, Maud on the show gets pregnant, and this becomes the first episode on the history of television to ever deal with of the abortion issue, in which Maud and her husband, Walter, decide that they're going to get an abortion. So, but from this show, from Maud, comes another spinoff, a spinoff that another would also change the face of television, and that's Good Times, the first show to ever depict an African American family. Maud's housekeeper, Florida Evans. There's this one episode where her husband comes looking for her because he doesn't want her to work anymore. The husband, played by John Amos, was called Henry on that particular episode, but they would change the name later to James. Esther Rolle, who played the part of Florida Evans, she initially didn't want to do the show if the show didn't have a strong black male fatherly lead, because there were shows already on the air. Julia, played by Diane Carroll, that she was a single mother. So Esther Rolle didn't want to portray that. Esther Rolle wanted to portray an intact African American family living in the south side of Chicago in the Cabrini Green projects, and that show lasted from from 1972 to I believe about 1974. Uh, no, my mistake. It was 1974 to 1979. That show lasted good times. And then he also had another show, another spinoff of All in the Family, The Jeffersons. Who can forget that episode? Hey, Lisa, who can forget that episode in which uh, a family moves next door and Archie discovers that the family that is moving next door is a black family? And he puts up a big stink, and it turns out to be the Jeffersons. And we're introduced to Sherman Helmsley's iconic character of George Jefferson, who is just as bigoted and just as close-minded as Archie is. As close-minded as Archie was and is to black people, to black people, uh, George Jefferson was to white people, always calling white people honkies. And then he discovers that his son Lionel is going to get married to a mixed girl, and then his wife befriends the Willises, played by Roxy Kravitz, and he then moves on up to the East Side, and they have their own show. That show lasts from 1975 to 1985. Um, and in fact, Norman Lear's second show, the one that people don't really talk about, the one that I love, was Sanford and Son. Sanford and Son, another show that came from the idea of British television. Originally, it was about a North London junk dealer and his son, but Norman Lear decided to Americanize it and place it in Watts, Los Angeles, and make it an African American show starring Damien Wilson and Red Fox. Red Fox at this time was an underground sensation. He was in the 60s. I say Red Fox was probably the funniest man in all of America. His records were controversial. They were like it was like having Richard Pryor's records or like having NWA's music records in the 80s. It was just very controversial because he was one of the first comedians that was cursing, one of the first comedians that was making raunchy jokes. So Norman Lear decided to bring him to the mainstream, and he created for uh, Sanford and Son, which also Fred G. Sanford was also kind of racist. Who remembers a time when uh, when Lamont, his son, brung over his friend Raul, played by Gregory Sierra, and, and uh, he starts making all kinds of anti-Puerto Rican jokes towards Gregory Sierra, Raul. You know what I mean? And of course, the banter between him and LaWanda Page, Aunt Esther, played by LaWanda Page, was legendary. That was they were the first Pam and Martin or Al and Marcy. You know what I mean? As far as like the back and forth that they would do. But yeah, uh, but Norman Lear was prolific not only in television, not only using the medium of television to express different views. One Day at a Time too was another one with Valerie Bertinelli about a single mother during the feminist era, the early feminist era of the 70s. But not only that, but in 1980, when the Moral Majority and Jerry Falwell were starting to rise up and starting to influence politics, especially after the election of Ronald Reagan, that year. It was Norman Lear who decided to create his his own political party for the liberal side. He did it several times, but he started in 1980.
That was crazy. Or we went behind the computer, right?
Yeah.
I took a pair of black jeans out or blue jeans. I don't know which one you want to put on tomorrow. Not the dirty ones, so we got another pair. You want ice cream, Hydo?
No, hold on.
No?
Yeah, I'll take some. Uh, People for the American Way was the name of his political party that he started off to combat the influence of the American right in media. I think he was a guy who always believed, like I said from the beginning, from that encounter with Father Coughlin's show in the 30s, that you can use the power of media to influence people and influence the public. A good movie to watch about him, a documentary about his life, is Norman Lear, Another Version of You, that came out in 2016. Uh, he's just saying that all his shows had some type of lessons in them. Yeah, um, they were shows about the society that was going on. He tried to use education to he tried to use entertainment to educate the people. Now, there is some controversy regarding him. Eric Monty, who was a writer on Good Times and the Jeffersons, and was famous for directing 1975's um, Cooley High, starring Lawrence Hilton Jacobs of Welcome Back Carter fame. He sued Norman Lear. He claimed that the idea for Good Times was his idea, and that the idea for What's Happening was his idea. It was all based on his 1975 movie, Cooley High, and that Norman Lear was a plagiarist, and that Norman Lear was a culture vulture. Now, this is true. You know what I'm saying? Norman Lear was, I don't know about being a culture vulture, but he was sort of a plagiarist. I mean, the guy the guy ripped wholesale the idea of All in the Family from another show. He ripped Sanford and Son from another show like we just talked about. So of course the man copied other people. He didn't come up with these ideas originally. Right? So Eric Monty had a point, and he sued for millions of dollars, and he got the settlement because there was a point to it. Now, there is another story too, where the Black Panthers came into Norman Lear's office when he was working on the Jeffersons, and they threatened him that if he didn't make this character of George Jefferson have some self-respect, that they were going to do him harm. You know what I mean? Because at this time, again, like we talked about in the shot video, um, uh, groups like the Black Panthers understood that the media, just like Norman Lear understood that the media is very powerful in influencing how people thought. But one thing I will give him credit for, even if it wasn't his idea, was my favorite show from him, least, probably The Jeffersons or Good Times. I will give him credit because before Good Times, you never saw a black family, and then God bless them. And then black families became all the rage in the 1980s with the revival of sitcoms. Because see, what happened with what happened with once his run ended and CBS no longer was the most popular station on TV, then you had Fred Silverman come in, and in actuality, Fred Silverman, the head of was it ABC, he needed a counteract for the success of Good Times, and JJ, and that's how he created the Fonz. And sitcoms kind of went away in the late 70s with the rise of shows like Dynasty and Dallas. And it wasn't until 1984, again, when Bill Cosby revived sitcoms on NBC, and you saw a different side of black media, a different type of black family. But you would have never seen any black families had it not been for Norman Lear. I mean, yes, he copied it, he plagiarized it, but again, it's like with music, guys, it's gonna always take a white man to bring black culture, unfortunately, because of the society that we live in, that is white supremacy. You know what I mean? We live under a system of white supremacy. So being as though we live in under a system of white supremacy, unfortunately, is always probably going to, most of the time, not all the time. There's exceptions to the rule. It's probably always going to take a white guy and a white guy's influence to bring black art and media to the forefront. You know what I mean? This has always been the case. Unfortunately, this sucks that it's like that, but that's the way it is. You know what I'm saying? Vanilla Ice just did an interview with Vlad on Vlad TV, talking about he was the one who took hip hop to the mainstream. I don't necessarily agree with that. You know what I mean? Because Run DMC took it to the mainstream, but again, Run DMC too had Rick Rubin's producing and backing him up. You know what I mean? This is something that is a sad reality that black art, black entertainment, oftentimes, and black politics, oftentimes takes a white face and it takes white influence in order to bring it to the forefront, because the society is a white society and a racist society, and they only respect each other. So if a blackface is bringing this concept like Good Times and the Jeffersons and stuff to studios, they're respected more than if it's a black producer. I wish it wasn't like that. You know what I mean? But unfortunately, that's how it is, guys. Anyway, peace. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to see my next videos coming out. Thank you for contributing.